There is nothing worse than an old backwards religion. Let's talk about backwards people for a minute. Backwards people. You know, there's a program out that you can get for your child, whether they're 1 or 2 years old, 3 years old, that'll teach these babies to do what they call reading. It's called My Baby Can Read. And it teaches these babies to read in a backwards way, to where an outsider who doesn't know them will actually think that they're reading. You will think they're reading at 1 year old. You will think they're actually reading at 2 years old. But actually, they're not reading. They're not reading because they never learned their ABCs. They're not reading because they don't know how to sound out their ABCs. They're not reading because they haven't learned to put letters together to make words. But they followed that backwards program. Now they think they can read. So what's going to happen when these kids get a little older and they go to pre-K or kindergarten and a teacher is actually trying to teach them how to read for real? What's going to happen? They don't want to hear what the teacher is saying. I don't want to hear you because I know how to read. No, wait a minute. I'm trying to show you how to sound out these letters. No, I know how to read. I'm trying to teach you all of your ABCs. No, I know how to read. My baby can read. Well, I got news for you. Your baby can't read. Your baby is in trouble. So then you take people like myself, musicians. I grabbed the keyboard years ago and just started playing. I started learning how to play songs. That's backwards. That's just as backwards as my baby can read. I didn't learn any chords at all. I didn't learn any progressions. I didn't learn any scales. I just grabbed the piano and started learning how to play songs. Now, thank God I got to a point where I started learning theory and all of that. I got right, but I started backwards. Backwards is the wrong way to do anything. But then you got to look at the church. What happens in the church? People come in, oh, I want to give my life to God. All right, come on. Boom. You just gave your life to God because you went to the altar. Now you're saved. Now you love God. No, you don't. You're backwards. The first thing we want people to do when they come into the church is start giving tithes. Why are you giving tithes? You don't know what tithing is. Why are you giving tithes? You have not learned God's system. Your tithes mean nothing. Why are you giving offerings? You have not learned how to live by God's system. Your offerings mean nothing. But you got people who think just because they do certain things, they're all right. Just because they attend church and they do certain things, that means they're saved. Just because they attend church and do certain things, that means they're a believer. No, it doesn't. You're backwards. You have not actually learned to read. You have not actually learned the piano. You have not actually learned to live for God. You're backwards. But people want to do things backwards. Yes, even in the church, people want to do things backwards. You want to come in and claim to be something that you're not. You want to come in and say, yeah, God called me to preach. Why would God call you to preach? You have not learned how to live for God yet. Why would God call you to lead a church and be a pastor? You have not learned how to live by God's system. That's backwards. Why are you up even trying to preach? We don't want to hear you preach. You can't teach us nothing because you don't know how to live by God's system. I just talked to a guy the other day. He wanted to let me know that he's a prophet. Didn't you just get out of jail? When are you going to sit your ugly self down and learn how to live by God's system to become a believer, and then become a minister, and then become a pastor, and then become a prophet, or whatever you call yourself trying to be? You're backwards. You're doing things backwards. And most people that you see claiming to be whatever in God, or claiming to be whatever for God, most of them came in backwards. So if you ask them anything serious, they don't have any idea how to help anybody. They don't have any idea how to lead somebody to Christ. They don't have any idea how to actually help somebody be a believer. All they know is religion. All they know is backwards religion. That's why you got so many people who will strive to try and be a believer. They will strive to try and be a Christian. You don't have to try to be a Christian. Being a Christian is not something you should be trying to do. Just do it. If you're going to be a believer, just be a believer. But because you came in backwards, there's a lot of things you don't understand. Because I grew up learning about God backwards, there was a lot of things that I just didn't understand. And when somebody tries to tell your backwards butt how this thing really goes, you don't want to hear it because you think you can read, right? My baby can read. Being a Christian does not entail letting all the things that you know is sin go. You think, well, I'm going to teach this person to stop clubbing. I'm going to teach them to stop smoking. And when they stop clubbing and when they stop smoking, that does not make them a believer. That makes them a person who is trying to be a Christian. When are you going to teach them how to become a believer? If you become a believer, you don't have to worry about those things. Those other things going to fall off. But now we see a church full of people that sit up full of sin because sin never fell off. And sin never fell off because they never became a believer. They're backwards. You're trying to live for God backwards. If you look in scripture, look at Jesus, which is our example, right? Jesus didn't die, or they didn't come against Jesus and want to kill Jesus because he went against certain things. They didn't want to kill Jesus because he spoke against adultery, because he spoke against homosexuality. They didn't want to kill Jesus because he told them that they need to be tithing. They didn't want to kill Jesus because he was preaching the truth. They wanted to kill Jesus because he was walking in power. Or in their eyes, he was claiming to be the Son of God. In their eyes, he was claiming to be a God. And they wanted to kill him. Now that was our example. But we think we're something because we go around coming against people. We think we're something in God because we speak against homosexuality. We think we're something in God because we speak against all kinds of sin. We think we're something in God because we're saved, right? Because we're Christians, right? But why we're not walking in power? If you was walking in the power that you should be walking in, they would want to kill you for what they wanted to kill Jesus for. Walking in power, living by the power, not by coming against something, by speaking against sin. Look at the ones who got imprisoned in the Bible. Why did they get imprisoned? They were never imprisoned because they spoke against people. They were not imprisoned because they spoke against sin. They were imprisoned because they were teaching the power of the gospel. They were teaching about the power of the resurrection of Christ. It was all about the power, walking in power. They didn't want people walking in power. When you walk in power, these people out here know they can't touch you. God's system will whoop your tail if you try to come against me. Try to speak against me and watch what happens in your life. Try to put your hands on me and watch what God's system does to you. You can't touch me. As long as I live by that power, I can't be touched. That's where my confidence is. That's where my blessing is. That's where God is, because that's where I am. Stop living backwards and get in God's system, because religion has you walking backwards. I'm telling you, God's system is the only way to live. Get in God's system and stop living by that backwards religion.